Good evening. So we're in the middle of looking into the perspective of what was going on in the Jewish world during World War One. We talked about soldiers from the different countries, including Pale Settlement, what they went through, what was their motivation in going in to serve their country. We talked about the civilians, what they were experiencing, and I'm going to finish up now a little bit about civilian life and talk about a couple topics we've talked about a while ago, but yet it's just another piece of the puzzle we're just filling in. And then we're going to get to one of the main topics I want to get to tonight. We'll see, of course, I mentioned in the message today, is the Balfour Declaration, which is I would say, misunderstood for some reasons, which we'll talk about, but plays an extremely important part in our history. So just kind of finishing up this idea, remember we were talking about the Pale Settlement, and at some point around 1915, the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians occupy the area known as Pale Settlement. And then I said last time that the Jews, their lives in the Pale were really terrible, whether they were getting conscripted, whether they were being beaten and pogroms, and it was institutionalized. It wasn't just here and there. So their situation, once the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians start to occupy the area, the situation for the Jews becomes better, at least in the short term. In general, the Jews were treated better than they were before. They were not subjected to this collective punishment or mass deportation. We talked about one of the things we talked about last time was not just the collective punishment, was mass deportation, throwing people out. Like, where they're supposed to go. It's not like you can, oh, well, you know what, they threw us out of Pale Settlement. We'll go to the airport, we'll fly to Austria, whatever, Switzerland. It just didn't work that way, obviously. And the institutions of Jewish life, which in some cases had gone by the wayside, were allowed to reawaken and were allowed to proceed. And there's also somewhat of a economic normalization. People who had experienced years and years of Russian persecution were all waking up to a partially different day. But it wasn't because the Germans were just such wonderful human beings. They decided, we're going to treat our Jews nicely. It was a strategic calculation. They wanted to win over the Jewish population, but there was a reason for it. Again, it wasn't because they wanted to be so nice to the Jews. The reason was they wanted to win the sympathy of world Jewry, and we'll see how, in fact, this is to Ad Hayom Hazeh, to this very day, we have this problem that by winning over the sympathy world Jewry, particularly American Jews, that the American Jews would be able to sway public opinion, both in America, and it would have some influence in Berlin as well. Meaning, the belief, and we're going to see this much more as we get to talk about England and the Balfour Declaration, that Jews hold such power that if only we can get the Jews to get on the program, they will influence their government to be nice to us. The German and Austro-Hungarian governments allowed the establishment of welfare organizations, like I said, to help their fellow Jews within the Pale Settlement. But the German occupation was not, I wouldn't say it was benevolent by any stretch of the imagination. The Jews were still exploited for two main things. Number one, labor. And they were also exploited for resources. So I'm going to make up something, doesn't necessarily mean this is what happened. The Jews, many of them had furs, whatever. They didn't. Let's just say they had furs. Well, they realized they need that, or they had metal in their homes, in their yards, in their shtetls, and they were just to take the metal and use it for that. Food was a rare, unfortunately, a commodity that was not that easily gotten. And the Germans, again, they were still trying to be good to the Jews, but they're still Jews. Unfortunately, that's how they're looked at. So food was extracted from the Jews by force in order to feed the German war machine, leaving the civilian populations, Jew and non-Jew, with severe shortages. And still there were Jews who were conscripted into the army. And basically the German presence was really a military occupation. Yes, they did treat them better than the Russians, but it was still no picnic. One of the topics we talked about a while back was American Joint Distribution Committee, the JDC it's known as. We're going to just talk about it briefly since we spoke about it before at length, but it's important to know what was going on. At the same time this is going on in Europe and in the Pale of Settlement, American Jews are prompted to try to unite for relief efforts. Again, I said this is the whole thing of the mashal of the Lego we talked about last time, which is all these little pieces that we talked about. Now we're trying to put it together. So here they're helping in this particular time. It's 1914. The joint during the war raises at that time in 1914 $63 million, which in today's numbers does not sound like a lot of money, but in 2026 dollars, I checked, it's the equivalent of $2.1 billion. And that was an extraordinary amount of money being raised for aid for their fellow Jews. And the money was used to provide food, medicine, shelter, education, refugee assistance. And they became, the JDC, as we talked about a while back, the main relief organization for the Jews. But again, we spent a lot of time on them before, and I don't want to spend too much more time now on that. During World War I, there were certain opportunities that were still created for Jews, and specifically in the area of political diplomacy, which was, you would think it'd be impossible, but there are still things that were happening. The World Zionist Organization was in a pretty delicate position. Their headquarters at this time was in Berlin. Their leader had died in 1914, right, during the war. Their primary institutions were in Germany and Austria. And also they were very important. They had many important political relationships. And their territory was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, who was an ally of Germany. In the meantime, they also had branches in England, in France, in Russia, in the United States, who were allied powers. So you see that they're spread out all over the place. And at the same time, they're trying to do what they can for their fellow Jews in all these countries. And in this mix comes a man who you all know, Chaim Weizmann. Chaim Weizmann is a Russian-born chemist, and that's a very important piece of this information to know that he was a chemist. He was working at University of Manchester, and he became probably the most important, maybe not the most, but most effective Zionist diplomat of the years of the war. His position that he had in England, his scientific credentials, what was it he did that was so special? He was able to do something that helped produce acetone in a much better way, which was crucial for British munitions production. And by doing that, he was endeared to the British government because, again, I'm going to make something up. Let's say, Israel, we have the Kippat Barzel, and let's say there's one ingredient for Kippat Barzel that takes a lot of time to make and it's very expensive, and someone comes up with a way to do it that costs, as they say, pennies on the dollar. Okay, it's going to be someone from outside Israel, someone from Switzerland. Well, that guy is going to be, lauded by the Israeli government. So this is what Weizmann did. He was able to do something that helped the war effort for England, and therefore the British government was in his debt. He also had some very important characteristics or character traits. He had the gift of gab, the ability to speak. He was a very persuasive speaker. He was a negotiator. Probably his most important achievement during the war years was cultivating all of these relationships with the British politicians, including David Lloyd George, who eventually becomes prime minister, and the name for whom the Balfour Declaration is stated is Arthur James Balfour, who was the foreign secretary. Also, there's another couple names I'll just throw out that he became close to: Leo Amory and Mark Sykes. Some of you may be aware of what was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was kind of a secret agreement that they were playing. British were playing both sides of the fence, but I don't want to get into that because it's not our topic tonight. But it did eventually, all of his connections, all of his diplomacy, all of his ability to be out there and do what needed to get done, all of that led eventually to the Balfour Declaration in 1917. The full story of the Balfour Declaration, which we're going to talk about, which we're going to basically, it represented an intersection which today is a terrible word, intersectionality. It's like the gays need rights in Portland because the Palestinians don't have any rights in Gaza. Intersectionality is shtuyot. Okay, but back then we're talking about the intersection of the Jewish political aspirations, British imperial strategies, dynamics of wartime. So a lot of things were starting to fall in place. You know, we can look at this just from the historical perspective, but as believing Jews, we know that Hashem is the one who's moving all these chess pieces around. The Balfour Declaration was not a gift that was just given freely out of sympathy for Zionist ideals. It was a calculated diplomatic act. I'm kind of like as a little bit of an introduction now to get into the nitty gritty. That would be trying to prevent the Germans from making a similar declaration for various political reasons. What I'm going to do a screen share here. I'm going to put on the screen the declaration. I'm going to read it. Okay. It was addressed to Lord Rothschild. And again, we talked about Rothschild many times, quite a long time ago, as far as the idea of who he was and how the money that he did to supply the Jews and help the Jews in Palestine, he became like the unofficial Jewish king, so to speak, of this time period. So the letter was the following. I'm just going to read it, and then we're going to go back to this. We're going to kind of go with like the Rashi and Tosfot on it. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure, by the way, just as a historical aside, for those of us who grew up in the United States, who grew up, let's say you were doing school in the late 50s, in the 60s, and in the 70s, when you'd buy the Machberet that it was blue, and a picture of the Rambam on it, and the back, it usually had Hatikva. My father told me that when he was growing up, that when he would get this Machberet in school, the back had a copy of the Balfour Declaration on it. So yeah, it's pretty cool. I've never seen one, but I'd like to see if any of you happen to have one. I'd love to see a picture of it. In any case, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with the Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the cabinet. And this is the declaration, 67 words. His Majesty's government view with favor, even though they don't know how to spell favor. That's okay, they're British. His Majesty's government view with favor, the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours sincerely, Arthur James Balfour. I was just waiting thank you for your attention to this matter, but there's a little bit slightly different than that. Okay, so what's going on here? What is this? What is it not? Why is it historical? Why is it such an important piece of our history as well? I think the best way to start off is to explain why Britain issued this in the first place. What did it promise? Why was it so controversial? It was only, like I said, 67 words, but the impact was tremendous. And by the way, the impact was actually greater later, which we'll see, rather than earlier when it was first published. Many people talk about Britain as having given, with this document, given Palestine to the Jews. You know, if you do a quick cursory reading, it looks like they gave the Jews Palestine. Absolutely, positively not. And we're going to see how it's absolutely not there. Others looked at it from the other extreme. No, that's an extreme, saying that the British said, okay, Jews have Palestine. The other extreme is that it was a propaganda statement. There's really no legal significance whatsoever. By the way, that's also inaccurate. It had legal status. It was the beginning of a tremendous transformation for what was going to happen in the Middle East. The Zionist movement now stopped being just some kind of dream of a people. Remember, we don't have at this point, we're Baruch Hashem blessed. We have a state coming up almost on 80 years. But at this point, going back about 110 years now, there's no state. So any idea of a homeland for the Jewish people is still a dream. And remember, just putting in parentheses, we talked about the whole Zionist movement starting in the mid-1800s and the first Aliyah and how things they dealt with and the problems they had. What it became was an internationally recognized political project. More than being just a pipe dream, now it's a project, something that the people around the world, the Jews especially, would be able to sink their teeth into somehow. But we have to understand, as I sent out the message today, we have to understand three questions. We have to answer three questions about the Balfour Declaration. Number one, why did Britain issue it in the first place? Number two, what did it promise? And number three, why has every word been debated ever since? Now, you'll find over time, whether it's a law that's been passed in Israel, the Declaration of Independence in the United States, municipal laws, whatever it might be, sometimes are left ambiguous. And by leaving them ambiguous, and then sometimes UN resolutions, whatever they're worth, which is nothing anymore, but what they used to be worth something, maybe, when UN resolution, then there's a word, the letter A instead of word the. A being the indefinite article, the being a definite article, meaning something specific. And there have been debates by scholars and by legal experts when there have been such declarations, what the word means and what it's referring to. So let's go back a little bit now and talk about what was going on with the British during this time period. What was their situation in 1917? So October through November 1917 was a very difficult part of World War I. The Russians had effectively collapsed following the Bolshevik Revolution. Germany still occupied much of Europe. The Ottoman Empire maintained control over a vast area of the Middle East, and Britain was exhausted financially, militarily, my guess is also emotionally, and they were looking for any possible diplomatic advantage. They needed something. So they needed something to have their hat to hang on, so to speak. And there were several motives now coming together. So first would be strategic interest. What would be the strategic interest in issuing this declaration? They saw Palestine as being strategically vital. The main reason was that the Suez Canal had only recently-ish opened up, and that was Britain's lifeline to India. So therefore, a good relationship, a friendly relationship. Remember, this is before the British mandate. Mandatory Palestine starts after this. It goes until May 14th, 1948. So it's like 31 years. But we're before that still. So it's not like they're not controlling the land. It's under the Ottoman Empire still. So the Suez Canal, which is the lifeline for Britain to their trade with India, which was still already even then massive amounts of population, they felt that a friendly population in Palestine, Jew, non-Jew, it didn't really make too much difference, I would imagine, to them, would help secure Egypt and the canal, and they'd be able to not have any problems. And now, if you ever want to question how things proceed in history, again, you often have to just open up your newspaper or go online. The whole concept of the Straits of Hormuz by the Yamach Shemams who want to block it and stop it and all that business and all this, the same thing. It's just happening today versus the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal, of course, as you would very much remember, was the whole the block in the Suez Canal was causes belli, an act of war from Egypt, which leads to the 6-Day War. We'll deal with that obviously in its own time. So the first thing is the strategic reason that they want to make nice to the Jews in Israel and everybody else, is they want to be able to not have any problems with the Suez Canal. The second one is they want to win Jewish support. Here's where the same idea that the Germans had when they're trying to be nice to the Jews in the Pale of Settlement, the same thing is they want to win Jewish support as well. Why? Because they overestimated Jewish political influence. As I said, I didn't say it. It's been said for centuries. History repeats itself. Just if you hear, whether it's a Mamdani Yamach Shemo speaking or whatever his name is, the guy that came here to make trouble, this congressman who came to make trouble, or it's AOC, or it's the specter of AIPAC that runs American politics. Give me a break, okay? But the British also way overestimated Jewish political influence, and they believed that influential Jews in America would encourage a stronger America, commitment to the Allied war effort, which they were allies, of course, America and Britain. And again, Britain is on their hind legs right now because they're exhausted from the war, militarily, as we said before, militarily and emotionally and physically and armaments and so many financially. Others were hoping that the Russian Jews might discourage Russia from leaving the war. They were afraid. One of the things Britain was afraid of, that Russia would turn out, would leave the war, leaving whatever pressure was on England to proceed with this war, and put even more pressure on them, that the Russian Jews would say, no, 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 look what they're doing. The British are such tzaddikim. They're so righteous. They're helping the Jews have a homeland. And let's stay in this war. Obviously, these assumptions were extremely exaggerated, even mythical. Doesn't change. Doesn't ever change. The view that approximately 15 million humans can change the course and influence the course of world politics of 8 billion people is a mental illness. It's a horrible thing. Okay, but this is not the topic tonight. There was a man whose name was Isaiah Friedman, Dr. Isaiah Friedman, professor, who's a professor who taught history at Ben Gurion University in the Negev. He said, I'm going to read a quote from him, British statesmen often attributed enormous international influence to Jews that simply did not exist. I guarantee you, Isaiah Friedman, Aleva Shalom, he passed away in the 90s, would be able to say the exact same thing about the American government, the British government, the French government, every government. You ask them, yes, the Jews, they have tremendous influence. Again, you're hearing this in the news right now about, and I guarantee you that that Netanyahu is on his way right now to Washington. He's going for the Levaya for Lindsey Graham. Yeah. Huh?
Grammar? No,
Graham.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. And also he's meeting with Trump. And it's going to be like Vance himself, who's really turned out to be a piece of work. Goes on, talks on Rogan's thing for 3 hours, and the specter of the Jews and their influence over the government and politics. Nothing changes. Another thing that's often overlooked when it comes to the issuance of the Balfour Declaration is something that we can connect to today because of Mike Huckabee. Mike Huckabee, who is a tremendous friend of Israel, who calls what he says what has to be said, what many people in politics will not. And he's been called on the carpet for it a couple of times, but he's a believing Christian and a Christian Zionist, and works in our favor. This factor also had a piece of the decision in making the Balfour Declaration. Many senior British politicians genuinely believed that the return of the Jewish people to their ancient homeland was morally right. It was what the Bible declared. Prime Minister Lloyd George, for those of you who have been in the area of Emek Rephaim, there's a street there, Lloyd George. That's him. There's Maastricht, there's Lloyd George. There's all kinds of street names of people who are involved in this time period of history. If you were unaware of this, and I know that those of you who are tour guides, you know this especially, that neighborhoods in Yerushalayim have names that have to do, like they're collective. There are many, like within Rechavia, there's the Rishonim, and you have in the area of the Mifletzet, you have the names of the streets that voted yes in for the UN partition plan. So it's fascinating. But Lloyd George grew up reading the Bible. He was a religious man. Balfour, Lord Balfour. Lord Balfour. He also viewed Jewish restoration sympathetically way before the war. So this played a role. They also saw themselves in maybe a historical position that they can bring prophecy of the Bible coming true. And many leaders of Britain actually admired biblical Israel and believed the restoration was justice and was what needed to be done. There was another issue, and that was the Zionist diplomats. I mentioned briefly before Chaim Weizmann. He was not a visionary journalist like Herzl, Again, he was a chemist who did, we talked about the acetone and the propellant and all that business. When it came out, I said before that the government was in his debt. I didn't get to that into any details, so mention that right now. Lloyd George supposedly, it's legend, it supposedly went to him and asked him, how can Britain reward him? Now, you're in a position right now that you not only made a major difference, if you're Weitzman, made a major difference in the war for Britain. You not only are saving them a tremendous amount of money and labor hours and everything else, and you're given this question, what can we do for you? How can we reward you? The average person more than likely would want money, land, whatever it might be, stock options. I don't know. But that wasn't his answer. Supposedly his answer was, there's only one thing I want for my people. And that was, of course, the idea that we should have our own homeland. Whether every detail of that story is true or is mythical or it's a good mix, but it does capture this idea of what was going on at that time between the British and Chaim Weizmann. There was a historian whose name was Leonard Stein, and he said that Weizmann was probably the greatest diplomatic representative that Zionism ever had. He was granted access at the highest levels, and even Herzl had that opportunity, but it was different. He was meeting with kings and czars, and he was trying to do what he was trying to do. This is more tachlis on trying to do something. They each had their roles to play in the Zionist story, but Weizmann was the diplomatic more individual. What about the actual declaration itself? I'm going to reread. I'm not going to put on the screen. Reread a sentence, an opening sentence, and then we'll see a couple of points. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Sounds nice. What do you mean? It sounds like they're giving the country to the Jews. What does it not say? It doesn't say Jewish state. It doesn't say Jewish sovereignty. It doesn't say Jewish independence. It just says a national home, a wishy-washy statement, a diplomatic phrase, but it doesn't say anything about sovereignty. It doesn't say anything about a state with borders. It doesn't say anything about independence. Why? Because nobody could define it. No one could define exactly what it was this document was going to do. And the ambiguity, as I told you before, was intentional. Some British officials saw this as leading to eventual statehood. Some thought it was just a cultural thing, give them some autonomy in a country, a state within a state, or a people amongst the people. Others also said that the vagueness was done on purpose because members of the cabinet who were against it, the idea of giving a state to the Jewish people, could support this because it's not giving them a state. The people who were in favor of state could support it because it looked like it eventually could give them a state. So it was one of those situations very diplomatically crafted by Balfour of what exactly, so he could, how he could write something that could appeal across the aisle, so to speak. You also notice it says, reread the sentence. It says, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. What does that mean? It doesn't say of Palestine. It says in Palestine. It's a deliberate ambiguity. Again, it implied that a Jewish national home would exist somewhere within Palestine, not all of Palestine. In Palestine, right? Means like I say to you, where are we going to set up shop? We're going to set up shop somewhere in Ma'ale Adumim. Did I just grant you to set up shop in the entire city? No, there's going to be a place. Again, it's ambiguity. We're not saying that the Palestine's going to be a Jewish country. And then comes the famous qualification. Nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. There's another omission here. The Declaration mentions civil rights, religious rights, but it doesn't mention political rights at all. They can be tzaddikim and say we're giving them religious rights and we're giving them the civil rights and all, which are human rights in a sense. Doesn't say anything about politics. Doesn't say anything about a government. Doesn't say anything about running a country. Nothing. That omission is led to tremendous historical debate. Some historians say that Britain deliberately avoided recognizing Palestinian Arab national aspirations. Because remember, the Arabs, who are the vast majority in the country, the British had to dance a little bit, even though eventually they really are on the Arab side. Just take a look at Tarpat 1929 and what happened then with the massacre in Hebron, which we'll get to. Others said that Britain really believed that the future political structure remained undecided, so they can't commit to something by saying of Palestine. They can't say that. Either way, the omission of the political rights, the omission is probably one of the most consequential silences in 20th century diplomacy. It's like saying, I'm hiring you for a job. You come to the office and I say, okay, here's your desk. You have a break at 10 o'clock. You have lunch at 12:15. You have 3:45. You have to check in with me at the end of the day, and you leave at 4 o'clock. Okay, what do I do? Well, again, you have to come in the morning. But what do I do? You do stuff. What do you mean do stuff? What am I in charge of? What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to run? Am I the boss? Am I the underling or whatever? It's completely unclear. And there were some immediate reactions and some that you would expect. The Jews mostly, you'll see why I say that in a minute, were jubilant. They're extremely ecstatic. We already have the historical memory of the Balfour Declaration, the UN Partition Plan, where you see the famous, dancing in the streets, and the Declaration of Independence on the Friday, May 4th, 14th, but really, whatever. We'll get to that, the date, and the dancing in the streets and the reading of the names in the UN. We have all this collective memory. This is really the first of all those collective memories. This is the first document that gives any inkling, any hope that there's going to be some kind of a state one day for the Jewish people or homeland. So the Jews, for the most part, are jubilant. They're literally dancing in the streets. For many Zionists, it was the first recognition by any major world power that Jews constituted a nation that deserved a homeland. Rav Kook Zatzal saw it in Rav Kook's style, of course, as the part of the unfolding process of Geula, of redemption. The Zionist organization, World Zionist organization, celebrated throughout Europe and America, but not every Jew agreed. As you can well imagine, we're Jews. There's always going to be differences of opinion. You want to see differences of opinion? If you have a Gemara, I don't care if you have the entire Shas at home or you have one volume. Pick a page, any random page. You're going to see disagreements every single page in the Shas. That's who we are. There, though, the Gemara is L'Shem Shamayim. We're doing it for the sake of heaven. Hopefully they were doing it for the right reasons. Nowadays, not so much, unfortunately. But in any case, assimilation as Jews, here comes a theme that repeats and repeats and repeats back we talked about the 1800s, talked about the 1700s, the 1600s, and all the way back. And we'll still continue to talk about today, the fears of what will be called dual loyalty. That the British would look at the Jews now, or the French would look at the Jews, or the Americans look at the Jews and say they have a dual loyalty. Who comes first? Are you an American Jew or are you Jewish American? And this question is today, literally today, is being asked still in countries, and that you're because you got to keep on your head, or because you go to the temple or the synagogue, you have a loyalty to Israel before you have a loyalty to the United States. So on the one hand, is those Jews who are assimilated that were against this. The other end of the spectrum, of course, you think this idea of the anti-Zionist Orthodox, that's something new today. The Haredis and the Peleg Yerushalmi and all these people who block the streets and all these crazy things, horrible things they're doing, and do tremendous chilul Hashem. Back then also, they opposed it on theological grounds. We should have a country. Let the Messiah come. Let Mashiach come. Then we'll have a country. And by the way, they won't accept that either. It won't happen. Mashiach will, but they're not going to accept the country. I mentioned to someone recently, if you have, maybe I'll put it in the group afterwards, if you have never read the poem Mashiach's Hat, it's very, very, very worthwhile. I'll try to remember to send it afterwards. It's one of those things that's a sad, and you'll be nodding your head through the whole thing. So I'll try to remember to send it right after the class. What about the Arabs? Their leadership react with increasing concern and very anti look, you put yourself in the position of the Arabs. Okay, I'm going to make up a number because I don't remember. Let's say they're 80% of the population in Israel at that time, in Palestine. And now you're going to talk about this minority of a minority in the country who's getting these certain ambiguous rights. Like, hey, dude, it's our country. They still believe that. So they see this with a lot of concern, and many believe that Britain had already promised Arab independence through some other stuff, and the French pointed to another thing that I referred to before, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, Britain trying to play both sides of the fence with diplomatic contradictions in the Middle East. Again, nothing new. We see sometimes Trump tries to play both sides of the fence. Nothing new. But what happened with the document? What tachos had happened? Many people assume that this actually created legal rights, but it did not. It did not create legal rights. What it was a statement of British policy. Its real significance, as far as legally, only came a little bit later, when there was a conference known as the San Remo Conference, which we'll talk a little bit about maybe next time, incorporated the declaration in post-war policy. After the war was over, there was a division of land in Europe. Who got what? And names of countries. There was no more Austro-Hungarian Empire. There was Austria. There was Hungary. All kinds of things that were divided up. And because most of us, I assume, listening now, were not living in 1920, the San Remo Conference time, we can appreciate this for when the fall of communism, when Yugoslavia was chopped up into multiple countries. As just as an example, when the former Soviet Union, the United Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, became the former Soviet Union and became many republics of many different countries. Okay, so we understand that concept. So in 1920, the San Remo Conference, it makes it as part of the Balfour Declaration becomes part of post-war policy. And in 1922, the League of Nations formally charged Britain with facilitating an establishment of a Jewish national homeland. Interesting. Nothing happened then. So what started off as this diplomatic letter of 67 words with some ambiguity, not some, a lot of ambiguity, eventually becomes part of international law that helped govern the British mandate. Because eventually this becomes part of their mandate to run this country, to enact the Balfour Declaration. That transformation from a policy statement to international obligation is often overlooked. But it's really important for us to understand the declaration's significance. So I'm going to stop here. We're going to pick it up Bezrat Hashem next week at the armistice in November 1918, when there was a ceasefire and whatever else was going on. Bezrat Hashem will pick it up next week. And I was going to say one other thing. Oh, I'm going to look up right now Mashiach's hat and send it out so I don't forget. Okay. Laila Tov to everybody, or good afternoon, depending where you are. And thank you for being here.